So we're gonna, I have a lot of speakers today. So I don't generally do it, but I'm going to need to limit the testimony to 3 minutes, just because there's a lot of speakers and we have 4 bills. I beg your pardon?
I didn't get a chance to put my name on that, but I will introduce the bill on behalf of the Fish and Game Committee and the House.
Okay, I recognize you.
Thank you. Mr. Swain.
So HB 422 FN, and I recognize Representative Spalding. How are you, sir? He's a good golfer.
I'm good, thanks. Hopefully we'll be playing some golf soon. Howard hits a lot further than I do. Not always straight, but a lot further. So thank you, members, for having us here and for hearing HB 442. I am simply going to introduce the aspects of the fact that we worked hard on some amendments for this. We realize that there's still some cleanup that needs to be done, but Greg Hill, Representative Hill, will be bringing forward to you a corrected draft. We did attempt to have OLS make that 3 times, and it came back with errors every single time. So hopefully you have better luck getting the correct drafting done than we have had. The bill came out of our committee with 2/3 support, and it passed the House floor with more than 2/3 support of the entire House body. And with those stats, I will go ahead and leave your limited speaking time to all of the other people that will be speaking on it, but I will take questions if you've got any for me.
Questions from the committee? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. You just mentioned that it came out of committee with 2/3 support.
Yes.
I watched that, and it looked like you had a lot of people that weren't on your committee come in and vote in the executive session who might not have necessarily heard the 3 hours of testimony. Is that true?
We had 2 replacements on the Democrat side and 5 replacements on the Republican side because people could not be there.
Is there a follow-up?
No, all set. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
I'm going to go through this list real quick here before I start calling up folks. Support, opposed. All right, I'm going to try to read this right. Is it Salt or Salty? Could you, or is it Galt? I don't know what that is. What do you? Joe Goat. All right. You know what?
Did you sign up to speak?
I did not.
Did not. Okay. All right. Joe, sorry. Thank you. In opposition. And so, okay. So I have Buzz Scott, doesn't support or oppose, but wants to speak. Buzz?
Gino Marconi, head of the Port Authority here.
Okay.
Get him so we can.
Yep.
If you speak it.
Gino, I'm looking for it. Going once. Hey, Buzz, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Says you're not supporting, not opposing, but you want to speak.
That's right.
So we have a
on?
3-minute. We got a 3-minute just because we have so many people on this.
I
bill.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't support it or not support it because I appreciate the fishermen and I appreciate the divers. I have been working all my life on the water. I spent 17 years fishing in Maine, lobstering and seining for herring, scalloping, and other kinds of things. And in 1987, I left fishing to go out and figure out what I could do to help keep the fishing alive and well in the Gulf of Maine. I left and went back to the University of Maine, went in the Navy, went into the Antarctic program, And then I started flying remotely operated unmanned submarines and realized that it was time to come back to Maine and teach our kids what it's like to explore and understand the bottom of the sea floor. While we were doing that, we taught them how to scuba dive, we taught them how to fly remotely operated submarines, and as we were diving and exploring the seafloor, we were finding a lot of traps on the bottom, and they said, we got to do something about this. So we started talking to the fishermen, and we spoke with for about 2 days, we talked to fishermen, and they said that they could get us at least 10,000 traps in 2 weeks. And that's from their wharves, from their yards, and from the fishing gear that they had offshore that they were retiring. And so we started a process bringing those traps in and reducing them by crushing them. And then we were approached by several people in Boothbay Harbor who said, we think that there are a lot of traps on the bottom, and we'd like you to go down, survey the area, and take those traps out of the water. So we started that in 2020, and so far we've taken out 2,700 traps from just Boothbay Harbor alone. And after that, we were approached by people in Jonesport and Gouldsboro on Matinicus. These are all coastal fishing communities who asked us to come down and help them with their problem with the ghost gear and the derelict traps and the trash traps. So we started doing that, and we have removed almost 10,000 traps in the last 2 years, 2.5 years. We've had fishermen come to us in Jonesport, and I went to Jonesport to visit, and a fisherman said, jump in the truck. And I said, okay. We jumped in the truck, and he drove me out onto this old woods road. I thought it was the end of my life, for crying out loud. And he drove me out about 5 miles into the woods, and on both sides of the road, there were traps lining the side of the road, and they had just been thrown there and discarded there because there's not a lot of space to put them in the landfills or recycle them. And so we decided that it's time to change that, and that's what we're trying to do. We want to keep the fishermen in business, we want to keep the environment healthy and safe, and we want to teach our kids about.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
this.
Your 3 minutes, but.
It's up.
Yeah, however, we can still ask questions. Are there questions from the committee? Senator Bertzel.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. When you say you pulled up the traps, what were those traps abandoned on the bottom of the?
Abandoned, lost, cut off, hung down, yes.
Okay.
They had no buoy going to the surface.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Alcioli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. Have you done the same sort of reconnaissance in New Hampshire?
We haven't had the time, no.
Okay, thank you.
Question from the chair. Were those traps labeled? Did they have names on them? And they did?
Yes, they did. They had tags in them from the fishermen, yeah.
Right. And another question, you know, when we were talking about this last time, you know, there was a concern, you know, good divers going down and looking at them, and nobody wanted to touch their traps, especially the ones that were abandoned.
Right.
But somehow in Maine, I guess you were allowed to pick them up without any kind of consternation of the owners of the traps? We
are the only group that is allowed to do that. We have to work with the Marine Patrol and make sure that those traps are abandoned. We bring them in, we find out whose traps they are. We reach out to the fishermen who own those traps, and 20% of those traps are still fishable, and we give them back at no cost when that's possible.
Interesting. Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, you understand that in the language of this bill, there is no provision to allow divers to pull traps. I just wanted to clarify that because whatever they do in Maine, this is New Hampshire.
That's right, yes. I'm only here to tell the story about what we do in Maine.
In Maine, okay. So, so the traps are returned, but yeah, when you looked at the ocean board, if you will, are there still a lot there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's still a lot of traps in the water, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. There are a lot of traps. Upwards of millions.
Millions.
I would, yeah.
Wow. Senator Alshaw.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking my second question. Do you know how many lobster trap licenses are issued in the state of Maine, roughly?
4,400 to 5,500.
And how many traps per license?
800,
800.
yes.
Thanks.
There are some that are, some areas where 600 and 400 are the limit.
Further questions from the committee? Senator Ritzel.
Thank you for taking my question. Does Maine charge the fishermen for return abandoned traps? Are they notified and do they charge them?
No,
Thank you.
no, this is all volunteer and at no charge to the fishermen.
So the unclaimed traps, they don't end up in a landfill?
The ones in Booth Bay Harbor do because we haven't established a site to break them down and recycle them.
Is there a level of toxicity with those?
I probably shouldn't speak to that because I'm not a scientist, but they're coated in plastic with polymers that attach that plastic to the wire, so I would assume so.
Senator? Okay. So no further questions. Buzz, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you coming there from Maine. And if you have any further testimony that you want to write down and send to the committee, we'd appreciate that.
Be happy to.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call on Gino Marconi. On Gino, I'm going to get, he's from the Port Authority. I'm going to give him a little bit of extra time. So we're going to allot you an extra minute.
I'm not going to take that, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to yield most of my time to these experts that are sitting behind me.
Okay.
For the record, Gino Marconi, I am the chairman of the Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee, which is a statutory committee. And we advise Fish and Game Department, the legislature, and the state on issues down at on the seacoast area as far as marine species go. We work very closely with Fish and Game Department and the commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen. The committee's made up of commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, dealers, retired fishermen. It's quite a diverse group. And the message I bring to you today is the committee has voted again this year to oppose this bill. I distributed a letter. I'll apologize. It was the letter I submitted to the House Committee because I didn't have time to redo it. I will add one thing though. With these amendments on here, I just think that we're mixing some issues together. You know, I understand some of the gentlemen from the scuba diver groups that have testified and said that they're interested in helping pick up anything that might be on the bottom that, you know, could be abandoned or lost. But tying that in with allowing them to take lobsters are two separate issues. And we still believe that it's an unenforceable situation to allow scuba divers to harvest lobsters. They still can go get a lobster license and lobster traps and harvest them the way everybody else does. So I'll leave that alone and I'll yield my time to everyone else if it's okay.
Yep, thank you very much. Appreciate
All
your
right,
time.
thank you.
No questions from the committee? Seeing none. Bill Marconi. All right, now you can sit it. How you doing, Bill?
Good.
All right.
My name is Bill Marconi. I've been fishing my whole life, and I get 100% of my income is from catching lobsters. If I don't catch them, my family don't eat. So my concern is safety. Well, we fish along the shore. There's so much gear tight together. When there's lobsters there, we're fighting for spots. If you put a diver in that, you're asking for trouble. As it is now, when we're fishing there, and we have divers, you really got to be careful. I'm surprised no one's got hit yet. There's areas on the weekend that I don't even, I haul there on Friday. I don't want to be there on Saturday. The boat traffic, Newcastle and the river along the shores, on weekends is crazy. I mean, there's a ton of boats. And you put divers in there, I mean, I don't know how they're not gonna get hit. You're gonna have people swimming around, and you got all these boats. I mean, in the last 10 years, I've seen a huge difference in boat traffic. Like I say, on weekends, I don't even haul those areas. As far as lost gear, we spend $150 a trap. We don't lose. We lose a trap, we grapple it up, we get it back. These guys, they're not gonna. You lose one, you don't just forget about it. This lost gear thing, we grapple them up. I mean, you don't lose gear and just forget about it. It's too expensive. Like I say, and plus they talk about the ghost gear. Well, our gear has escape vents in them. They have steel hog rings that open up. So any lobster that does get in a trap that's not found, the lobster gets out. It takes me every 6 months. I got to put new hog rings in these traps because if I don't, they open up and the lobsters get out. So we're not setting gear, forgetting about them, and lobsters are staying in them. You know, that's not happening. Now, I got some friends in Maine, you know, and I told them, I was having coffee with them yesterday. I said, geez, I got to go to Concord and, you know, fight a bill for diving for lobsters. They couldn't believe it. They're like, you mean to tell me there's a chance divers could go down and get lobsters? I mean, the state of Maine they wouldn't even think of that. Not even think of it. That, you know, that's the biggest lobster producing state. They don't even consider that. And my last comment is, if these guys want to have, you know, catch lobsters, do it like I do. This state, the state of New Hampshire, lets you buy a 10-trap license, or I don't know what, 5 or 10-trap license, and you can catch them like I do. But don't put divers down there in this place and let them grab lobsters. It would be a terrible thing for this industry. Like I say, all these guys behind me, that's how we make our living. This ain't a recreational thing. This is how we make our living. That's all I
Thank
got
you very
to
much
say.
for your testimony, Bill. Questions from the committee? Senator Alshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Thank you for the work that you do feeding us. And I have a question for you. When you started your business and use lobster traps, they're not singular, are they? Or are they in a trawl?
Well, mine are in trawls.
Right. And is that the follow-up?
Follow-up?
Is that the most common way of
Yeah.
fishing in New Hampshire?
Yeah, these commercial guys have trawls. I mean, all of them do.
Which has how many on a line?
Well, some boats will probably have 10, you know, some have 20, maybe some have 5.
Follow-up?
Follow-up.
A buoy on each end.
So a buoy on each end with about 10 in between.
Yeah, average, yeah.
And when you haul up the first one, they all follow?
Yes.
And at what speed?
At what speed?
Sure. Is it quick or is
Yeah,
it
I
a
mean,
long time?
we try to do it fairly quick so we can keep going. We have, you know, there's so many to get through. But, you know, if there's no lobsters in them, you're buzzing right along pretty good.
Okay, thank you.
I used to be a lot faster. I'm not
One more follow-up, Mr. Chair?
All right.
One more follow-up, Mr.
One
Chair?
more follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. Do your traps have the door that biodegrades? So maybe could you just explain to the committee how a lobster gets in and out, how it's not one way until a certain certain size? Maybe could you explain that to the committee?
So
Thanks.
most lobster traps have 2 6-inch or 7-inch rings in the front of it. The lobster goes in that area where the bait is, and their first instinct is to get back out, but it's hard to get back out that ring, so they go further back to another type of head that puts them in the rear of the trap. Now, in the rear of the trap, most guys have 2 or 3 escape vents that are made so the small lobsters can get out through them. So all the little lobsters will get out through the vents. The vents that are in there all have, we put in steel hog rings. It's a biodegradable hog ring. In case that trap gets lost, that will open up, it rusts out, and the vent opens up, and now you have a huge hole, like a 5-inch opening, that all the lobsters get out. So anybody that finds a ghost trap, call it, would see, there would be no lobsters in it, it would just be a trap. But like I say, these guys, we don't lose gear like that. It's too expensive to do that. So,
Last question, Mr. Chair.
Last question.
Did you lose any traps last year, and how many did you lose?
when I did lose them, I grappled them back.
Yep.
Yes,
So none.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, testimony. Any further questions? Seeing none. Rep. Tira Harley? Tina?
Good morning, Senators.
Welcome.
I'm here to oppose the bill. I actually reside on River Street, which is where the boat launch is in Seabrook. And I've spoken to several fishermen, and they all feel that this bill is disastrous for them. I could go into some of the stories, but I do feel that one in particular, one lobsterman who told me that they just really feel that if they do lose a trap, it usually would be because of weather conditions, and they feel that they could hire a scuba diver as needed. But he also went into the fact that scuba divers are they do it for fun, for recreation. The lobstermen, that's their livelihood, and it would just be disastrous for them if they keep on losing trap after trap, which normally they don't, but when they do try and retrieve it. And sometimes they just feel like, for safety purposes too, if the traps, because of weather conditions, go so far and deep into the ocean that they can't, you just can't retrieve it. The scuba divers can't go down that low. But even if they could, and they retrieved it, they would need a boat with a wrench that you have to pull it. And most scuba divers wouldn't have that kind of equipment to be able to do it. So they kind of just feel that it would be, I hate to put in this word, but it would be theft, that they could just find lobsters 3 a day and just, it's taking away and making their jobs as lobstermen, which is crucial for New England. It would be making it small by allowing recreational people just to take the lobsters from the traps. So that's one story in a way, but I want to take any more time, but that's what was told to me. So
Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Representative, and thank you for your service. Rep. Mike Edgar? Opposes, not wishing to speak. I apologize. Yeah, I'm trying to get all the reps in because I know you're busy. Rep. Jason Jarvin?
Mike's right there.
Oh, Mike, you didn't sign up whether to speak or not, just that you're opposed.
Yeah, I signed up that I oppose.
But not that you want to speak, right? I just,
Let's assume speak, but there's so many people there.
okay. I do got you marked down that not wanting to speak. Rep. Jason Janvrin.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Representative Jason Janvrin. I represent Rockingham District 40, consisting of Seabrook and Hampton. I will say that as a young man, my father was a fisherman, not so much lobster, but he was a crab fisherman. And in order to be a crab fisherman, you got to be a lobsterman. So he had 5 or 6 traps. And I will tell you a story about what happened when I was a young man. I remember my father coming home, bandaged and beaten. And when my mother asked him what happened, he said, well, I found my brother was pulling one of my traps. So he and I duked it out. but not with fists. They used their oars to get back at each other. So I would say that lobstermen are very protective of their livelihood. And I think that this bill puts people that are in skin suits and wetsuits and that sort of thing against our lobstermen. I think you're going to see a little bit of animosity between the scuba divers are saying, we're doing this for the earth, we're doing this for the earth, but the lobstermen are saying, no, you're taking from my livelihood. So I think you'll notice that my name is actually listed as a co-sponsor of the House bill. It was before it was amended. It came to the House as a way to prohibit money from the state being used to enforce federal regulation. And that because the Congress stripped that out of, or put that off to 2027, this bill took a different meaning. And to say that it was to save the earth from derelict traps is incorrect. I will note that I served for 2 years on the Coastal Marine Natural Resources and Environment Commission. Senator Waters, you and I served on that committee. I've been renamed to that commission, I'm sorry. And I remember the conversation about derelict traps, and we were very happy with what was happening with that in the New Hampshire coast. I can't speak for Maine or Massachusetts, but I can say that in New Hampshire, there's a very good record of our lobstermen policing themselves. So I think the best way forward for this bill would be to put it to that commission to study. Not a study committee for our Senate or the House, but let that commission, the Coastal Marine Natural Resources and Environment Commission, go through and actually go through this bill, maybe come back with a proposal for future legislation. But as it's written now, it's very, very onerous. Instead of taking regulation away from the lobstermen, it's adding regulation to them. And I think that's disastrous for their industry at this time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and for your service. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Representative Thomas, are you here to testify on this bill? No? Okay, I just want to make sure. Just trying to find out where you're at on here. Okay, Mr. Khan? Representative Khan? Yes. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my first time I'm testifying in front of the Senate, and I'm excited. Also, not very nervous because a lot of my representative is today's senator. So, I'm feeling very good about this testimony.
Very easy to work with.
Easy to work with, yes. So I am the member of the Fish and Game Committee. I heard those testimony before. You will hear the testimony after me, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, Colonel Jordan, and others. The Colonel Jordan said, and I quote, many times that this law, it passes, is not enforceable. It'll be very difficult to enforce this law because it's not a good law that is going to create for his department. And coming from Seabrook, representing Seabrook for many years in the State House, it is very difficult for me to support this law because we are, the fishermen, the lobstermen are part of our society, our town, and it's going to be very big financial hardship for them that if they have any interruption in their business. One of the things that the fishermen's thinking that, as you know, that Seabrook Beach and the Seabrook Harbor, most of them are owned by the Seabrook taxpayer, not the state of New Hampshire. And it's bringing the collision course with divers and the fishermen that we do not need it. Divers are good people. They have good organization. They can do a lot of good things for the society and other places. But we don't need to bring them in a collision course between the fishermen, the lobstermen, and the divers. And New Hampshire is unique. We only have 17 or 18 miles coast. It's working. It's beautiful. We don't need to touch we don't need to do anything that is going to harm. And one last thing I want to say, honorable senators, when I was talking to a bunch of lobstermen in preparation for today's hearing, they asked me to tell them that when the honorable senator mentioned that when we had the testimony after lunch, a lot of our members who voted for it was not present on the testimony. And one of the fishermen asked me to mention his name. His name is Greg Marshall. He said he was really very upset that nobody heard about the testimony, but they voted against it. So that's my last thing to say. And thank you very much. I will take any question if you have.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for your service. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Representative Mason? Where is it? Where is his? Does that say Mason? Oh,
Good morning.
yeah.
And I'd like to say it's the first time I've been before a committee meeting on the Senate. As I looked through this bill, I was a little bit harder on some of the, let me get to my page here. Some of the actual work on it, and I know you're gonna hear a lot of testimony today. First off, I support an ITL for retaining this bill in committee. You're gonna hear a lot of testimony today. The first thing I wanna say is, it's almost impossible for conservation officers to police divers under the water. And that's going to create a lot of hardship between fishermen and divers. It's going to probably put some divers in harm's way when they might be grappling for traps or that they've lost or things like that. But as I come down the line, I go to page 3, line 28-4, the new lobster trap locating and tracking. I'd like to see this section eliminated. Storms often move traps. Commercial fishermen, they use onboard plotters to locate their gear. Paper documentation would be redundant, time-consuming, and virtually impossible in sea conditions. Lobstermen work in adverse conditions wearing gloves, rain gear. They're wet, they're covered with bait, seaweed, residue, and I just don't know how they can keep a written log. They often move over 100 traps a week from one location that's not producing fish to another location that's showing more promise. So the traps are constantly being moved, reshuffled, positioning for gear as they chase the lobsters around the ocean. The written log is just almost impossible. At a minimum, if you eliminated a date on it, because their onboard plotters don't put dates on it, and added onboard electronic plotter added to that. Instead, that is all the log that you really need. That's the only log Fish and Game needs to look at, because they know exactly where their traps are dropped from that plotter. Recreational fishermen, they don't have onboard equipment often. A written log for them is not, it would suffice. A lot of recreational trappers, they might put out 10 traps. A lot of times they'll fish a single trap on a buoy because they don't have haulers enough to pull them in. Those are your lost traps. When the buoy breaks off, how do you recover a box that's, smaller than this table? Commercial fishermen, a lot of them will fish trawls. Most of them fish trawls. And the trawls will have anywhere up to 10 traps on them. A good friend of mine, he fishes all six trap trawls. That's what his hauler hauls in easily, and that's what he does. When they go to grapple for traps, it's a lot easier because there's a buoy marker that was on each end. Maybe the buoys are gone in the storm, but they've got a long line. If they hook it anywhere in between, the grapple catches that. Page 3, line 30 and 31, reference resident lobster license.
Representative, it's past the 3 minutes.
Past my 3?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, if you
So-
take that testimony, that's great.
That'd be great. I'm going to open it up to questions, so if there are questions from
Go
the
ahead.
committee. Testimony's good. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony. Colonel Jordan?
We got Representative Munns here.
Oh, Representative Munns, Colonel, can you, like, Representative Munns? Yeah. Welcome. Are there any representatives here that haven't signed up that want to speak next? Seeing none? Okay. I wanted to get the reps in first because they represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senators. For the record, my name's Representative Chris Munns. I serve as one of the 4 representatives from Hampton in Rockingham County District 29. When HB 442 came to the floor of the House on March 22nd, I voted in favor of it. I'm here today opposing HB 442 and encouraging you not to make the same mistake I did. In the House calendar and during the debate on the floor of the House, proponents of HB 442 argued that it would protect the environment from the degradation of plastic and the indiscriminate killing via derelict ghost lobster traps, as well as fulfilling the mission of Fish and Game to preserve and protect and increase the sustainability of our natural resources. They also stated that around 1,100 derelict lobster traps are added to the bottom of the ocean every year, and they told us that New Hampshire is an outlier in terms of states that allow lobster fishing by scuba divers. Hearing all of that, I convinced myself that a vote in favor of this bill was an environmentally responsible thing to do, and it would do no harm to our fishing industry. Well, after speaking directly with a marine biologist and several New Hampshire lobstermen from my town and others along the seacoast, I now must admit that I was wrong. To a man and a woman, the people I spoke to are proud of the work that they have done over the years to nurture and protect the lobster population and make it one of the healthiest and most sustainable resources that is still left in the Gulf of Maine. Whether it is a coincidence or not, Maine, where 85% of the American lobster catch is harvested, and New Hampshire also do not allow scuba fishing. The lobsters harvested in south of New Jersey, where scuba fishing is permitted, are spiny lobster, more closely related to crayfish and have different behaviors and biology. While it is true that New Hampshire lobstermen do lose some traps each year, the number is less than 100 per year, not 1,100. And you've already heard testimony that says that's due in part to the fact that New Hampshire lobster fishermen use multiple trap trawl lines. In other areas of the country, lobster fishermen use single trap lines, which increases the likelihood of a trap going missing. And also, if a line is broken off New Hampshire waters and traps are lost and not immediately recovered in less than 60 feet of water, they usually are moved onshore during winter storms and removed by New Hampshire commercial lobstermen yearly with a coast-wide cleanup and recycled in a trash-to-energy project. Perhaps the most compelling part of the re-education I received from our local lobstermen is that while scuba fishing may seem more humane, the exact opposite is true. With traps, lobsters go in and out and feed on the bait that is left in them at their leisure. It is a more passive form of fishing. It's only if the lobster happens to be in the trap when it is pulled up that they are actually caught. And the bait in the traps, paid for by New Hampshire commercial fishermen, is also an important source of high-quality food for the lobsters. Scuba fishing, however, is much more aggressive. The diver must find the burrow in which the lobsters live and either take the burrow apart and in the process destroy the home and their breeding ground of all of the lobsters living there, or reach in and indiscriminately grab whatever lobster their hand touches. If that happens to be a lobster who is molting, that could kill it. Finally, while the bill we passed in the House contains some reference to the size of lobsters that can be taken by scuba divers, it does not contain any protections of and restrictions on brooding stock, female lobsters with eggs, which are critical to the sustainability of the lobster stock in the Gulf of Maine. I urge you to listen to the New Hampshire lobstermen who are here today carefully and to do the right thing. Recommend this bill as inexpedient to legislate. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, but I can assure you that the people sitting behind me are going to be much better able to answer your questions than me.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Colonel Jordan? Fish and Game?
Good morning, Chairman Avard, members of the committee. This will shock you, but I'm not here in favor of it either. The Fish and Game Department opposes it. The Fish and Game Commission unanimously opposes it. The Marine Fisheries opposes it. I would struggle to find anyone who supports it, other than some divers that are here today and the representative who brought it. I wish I had more. I would need probably 3 hours to go through this last amendment to point out all the deficiencies. And I've never seen anything like it, quite frankly, in the 12 years I've been coming here. This thing is a mess. It would be absolutely unenforceable based on a whole host of things. They're referencing wrong statutes. They're using languages and phrases that don't exist in the law. Things like lobster industry, lobster gear, lobster equipment. I'm not sure what that is. I don't think a court is aware. You know, when you create, I know I'm singing to the choir, but when you put these things into law, you have to use things that are enforceable in a courtroom. And if you don't do that, the law isn't worth the paper it's written on. It's not going to be enforced. And the bill, I thought it was interesting that they came in, the chairman came in and spoke about 2/3 majority of the committee that voted to pass this. 2/3 majority of the committee didn't even hear the testimony. So the vast majority of those votes came in the last 2 minutes I was testifying. They never heard the 3.5 hours of opposition prior to that. That to me was key. I think if people had heard the full story, you wouldn't have representatives here today telling you they made a mistake. The bill's been amended. I think we're up to 6 times now. I think I've lost track. You know, the fishermen call me and say, what one's going forward? I can't answer that because it changes all the time. I think, you know, we're trying to find a good way to pass a piece, to put on a bad piece of legislation to drive it through. And, you know, when you got to amend a bill 7 times, that tells me that the bill probably shouldn't go. That's for what it's worth, that's my own opinion. Derelict gear is the latest charge that we're using. I will tell you, and I probably don't have to tell you, but thanks to Senator Waters, we put a law in January of 2022 that allowed for the funding of this. This is alive and been underway for the past 29 years. We've been collecting derelict gear. The fishermen work with us. We return the gear that is reusable to fishermen. This is a problem that's already being addressed in New Hampshire and has been addressed for almost 3 decades. So I'm not sure why this is a new revelation. You're going to hear testimony today about a couple of states that allow for recreational diving. I will tell you, my 2 greatest concerns with this bill is, 1, enforceable. I can't enforce it. I'm not going to have an officer in a scuba tank down watching traps. I can't do that. And so I'm going to have a lobster fisherman. I'm telling you, I'm going to have a lobster fisherman, one of these gentlemen behind me, telling me that their income is being affected by a diver, and I'm going to be powerless to fix that. There's no other place in the state where that happens to me. We're always able to conduct surveillance, to do details, to do whatever we need to do to try and change this. This is not going to be one of those. I can't do anything about it. The only thing I can do is check them when they surface. It happens, a lot of it at night. I've called the other 2 states that allow for this, Rhode Island and Mass. I've talked at great length with their law enforcement people in both states. They both said when the lobsters were on shore in those states, they had a lot of issues with this. Now, because of warming waters in the ocean, their lobster population, a lot of it has moved offshore, so they don't see the problems they did see. The sponsor of the bill states that that's because there's no problem. Well, that's not exactly true. There's no lobsters there for the problem, so there's a difference. This bill requires reporting on habitat damage. I would challenge anyone to define for me how you do that. How do we do that? Do I put the director down in a scuba tank and he goes along to look for overturned ground? It just doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. The other big thing that I've been doing this, and I apologize for my anger and frustration, but I've been doing it for 33 years. I'm tired. I am tired of being mandated to do things with no funding to support it. They want an online registration. That costs $20,000 to $30,000, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have that money to do that. And it's not fair to ask the inland fishermen or the inland hunters and sportsmen and women to pay for that. There's no provision in here to do that. They want to register them online. They want to weigh them, which makes no sense to any of us. I don't know. We weigh deer. I don't know why I'd want to weigh a lobster. We don't do that now. And so there's a lot of this ridiculous, in my opinion, ridiculous mandates with absolutely zero funding in it. My agency's broke. I know you know that. I know some of you have worked on that. Just keep that in mind when you look at these mandates. Oh, you can use federal dollars was in one of these amendments. Well, if it was that simple, go ahead and give me more. I'll take federal dollars. We can't do that. You know that. That isn't possible. So there's no funding to support these ideas. And then lastly, you know, behind me is the best fishermen along the New Hampshire coastline, without question. These guys have got a skill set that I couldn't describe in the next 3 minutes accurately. They make their living on it. This isn't a game to them. They're paying their bills with it. And this is going to directly interfere with it. We sell 531 licenses along that coast. No non-residents, only residents. That's the possibility of 41,000 traps in the water on a 7-mile coast. And you don't think 100 more licenses is going to interfere with that? Come down and see the coast in the summer. Look at the buoys out there with the trawl lines and tell me that divers are going to go down there, they're going to chase lobsters around on the ocean floor, and they're going to swim over those traps and they're not going to dip into those traps. That's pretty naive to think that. There's probably no divers in here that are going to do that, because I'm going to tell you there's 2 in particular that I saw come in today that are absolutely fine gentlemen, and they would never break the law if their life depended on it. But I've been doing this for a long time, and there are people in every one of these sports that will do that, and they are going to do it in a lobster trawl. And we're going to have a problem with that, and I'm not going to be able to do anything to change it. So please don't put my officers in that position. Don't mandate more things for us without the funding to support it. And let's recognize what these guys have done along our coastline. And then the last thing I want to leave you to think about, why isn't Maine doing this? Maine has the largest coastline in the New England states. Why aren't they doing this? If this is such a great idea, why isn't Maine doing it? If you call Maine, sit down, you'll need more than 3 minutes, and they'll tell you why they're not doing it. And it's very much for the same reasons that we shouldn't be doing it here in New Hampshire. So thank you, and I appreciate your patience for my temper. I've just had it with these mandates. I've had it.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony, Colonel, and for your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Who did you say? Sherry Patterson. Sherry Patterson, are you here? Welcome, Sherry.
We're
You're
on
on.
now. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Cherie Patterson, presenting for the Fish and Game Department in regards to this current version of House Bill 442. As Colonel Jordan mentioned, the Fish and Game Commission is opposed to this special license for taking lobsters, utilizing scuba gear, as well as the state's advisory committee on marine fisheries that I believe you just heard from Gino Marconi are opposed to this bill. I have, for the sake of brevity, I have provided the testimony as well as some attachments that I highly encourage you to read through. One of the attachments has to do with a line-by-line concerns over this current bill and how the writing of this bill in many areas is not pertinent and it's not correct. As well as another attachment to this has to do with what New Hampshire Fish and Game and the fishing community has been doing to work with derelict gear recovery and prevention efforts and the funding associated with those efforts. So again, I encourage you guys to please read through that information. If there is anything that you have questions on, please do not hesitate to contact me. I would like to clarify that part of the reasons, well, the reasons why Fish and Game is opposed to this particular bill is we have 4 concerns. It includes a new harvest method during the time when the Gulf of Maine is experiencing climate degradation of marine habitat, which is also showing in a decreased population of young of the year of lobsters, and that's going to essentially affect the sustainability of the lobster population in the Gulf of Maine. Also, it's going to increase user conflicts. And as you heard from Colonel Jordan, it's going to be of enforcement concerns. There's going to be a lack of enforcement that is needed in order to work with the various users. So again, I encourage you to go through that line by line issues, and that's what I had testified at the last House hearing. As Colonel Jordan indicated, we are concerned about unfunded mandates that come from these rules. And if there's no clarity in these rules, then these unfunded mandates become even more difficult in trying to decipher how we are going to, for example, develop a reporting system or have a viable tracking system for lost gear. The department does not have the resources to conduct these unfunded mandates. Some of these mandates are actually in conflict to the American Lobster Fisheries Management Plan, which is created by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission in conjunction with states that have these fisheries. We all have a voice in and a vote in these mandates and in developing fisheries management plans to assure of sustainability for these populations.
I got to give you 30 seconds left because I've given you double the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, I just want to emphasize that people can currently harvest lobsters recreationally in New Hampshire via a 5-trap license, and this is open to any New Hampshire resident. The department believes the current system of harvesting lobsters via traps only provides a uniform enforcement opportunity while trying to provide a balanced access to the resource. And I thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and the department urges the committee to vote inexpedient to legislate for this bill. And do you have any questions?
Thank you for your testimony. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you very much.
We are going to get kicked out of this room at 12, so I'm going to really have to start getting a little stricter with the time, and I hate to say that because I like to give people a chance to talk. Graham Birch, wait a second, yeah, is Graham Birch in here? I'll tell you what, Damon, are you in here? Damon, we'll have you come up first. All right, running out of time, folks. No, okay. And you are?
My name is Graham Birch.
Graham. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you.
So we have I don't know if you heard in the beginning, we have a 3-minute rule. I'm trying to keep everybody a little closer to that because we're running out of time. They're going to, before they kick us out of here. So if you do not read from your speech, it would be great. If you can just talk from your heart, I'd appreciate it. Yeah. What's that? That too.
There we go. Thank you. So my name is Graham Birch. I'm a 26-year resident of Hollis, New Hampshire. I say that just in case you're thrown off by my strange accent.
Oh, that
and
sounds
thinking I'm an
just like
imposter.
Hollis to me.
So in my leisure time, I'm a part-time scuba diving instructor. I work for Aquatic Specialties in Merrimack, New Hampshire. I enjoy introducing our citizens to the sport of scuba diving and teaching them to enjoy and respect our coastal environment. So I'm here today as a member of the New Hampshire diving community. I want to express my support for House Bill 442. I think this is a very reasonable proposal. I think it respects the environment of the ocean. I think it respects the wildlife of the ocean and those that make a living from the ocean. I have 3 points to make, but I'll start by saying that none of the opponents to this bill are opposed to divers taking lobsters. They're only opposed to the method being used. And what they're proposing instead is that it would be preferable to use traps, and so divers could go get a recreational trap fishing license. In my testimony, I'll show you why diving for lobsters and taking them by hand is far less impactful than even using a 5-pot recreational license. So my first point is, and I think this has been made already, so I'll move quickly, but Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia all allow recreational diving for lobsters. I really don't understand why New Hampshire is so afraid of it. Point number 2, I'd like to talk about the impact to the lobster population and on sustainable hand harvesting of lobsters by divers. I know we're not Massachusetts, but looking for hard data, and I think that's important. We've got to make decisions based on hard data, not just supposition and fear. And so I came across this from the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. I've given out each of you a technical report. It seems to me like a very well-researched report. There's a lot of references in here. I think it's a very considered report, and it provides some very good hard data that we can use to help us make an informed decision. If I draw your attention to at least the introductory part, don't worry, I'm not going to read this whole thing. We don't have time.
Yeah, because we're running out of time, actually. Yeah.
So if I can just draw your attention, I have highlighted a few things on the introduction to give you some context. So I believe that this well-researched report is useful for 4 things. It refutes the notion that recreational trap fishing is preferable over hand catching. It quantifies the impact of diving for lobsters on the diving industry. It underscores the need to take action on our oceans to clear them of ghost traps. And it does not raise any negative issues at all related to taking lobsters while diving. So I'd like to just run by a few numbers.
I'm going to have to ask you to summarize because we're already after, and I hate to do this. I have still a lot of speakers on this.
Okay,
Yeah.
so very quickly. What is the impact of divers? Divers are not interested in stealing the livelihood of these gentlemen sitting behind you. And I wanted to give you an example of the impact. So if you run the numbers, either from this report or I have 4 other data points for you in my testimony, which you have a copy of. It's the catch by divers is 0.03% of the catch by commercial fishermen. So that's a hard number. No one understands 0.03%. So I gave you a graphic, which is in your packet there. So every red lobster on here is a lobster caught commercially, and the black lobster is the one that would be taken by hand. I have to tell you that if you look through my testimony, you'll see that this is actually an underestimate, and if you take other data points, you'll see that this is rather conservative, and you could actually, in cases, double the number of red lobsters on here. So the impact, frankly, is negligible. The idea of trap fishing is that we're not just fishing and taking, but we're actually farming. So we're feeding the lobsters at the same time. The equivalent would be kind of like asking a diver to say that every time you hand catch a lobster, why don't you just kill 3 fish and leave it on the bottom to feed the next generation of lobsters? That's absurd. Anyone can see that that is a way less sustainable way than just hand catching a lobster and bringing him home for dinner. With that, I rest my testimony and thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to testify. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll let David?
Good morning. My name is Damon Frampton. I apologize. I had to run to the restroom.
There's no excuse, Dave.
Is there a copy I can hand to this? Yes. Okay.
Be right back.
All right. I'll make this quick. Thank you. There's a lot of gentlemen here that need to speak. Attached is my prior testimony from the last hearing across the street at the legislature. So this is my new testimony. Good morning, and thank you for hearing not only my testimony, but all of us here against and not in favor of House Bill 442. It has to be obvious at this point that there's something wrong with this bill, as it keeps returning over and over with amended language to try to make this bill stick. At this point, not one, but many would think it's time to listen to New Hampshire Fish and Game, its biologists, its law enforcement, plus many other New Hampshire advisory boards and commercial fishermen that have testified over and over that House Bill 442 is not and never will be in the best interest of the state of New Hampshire and the sustainability of the lobster fishery. In my last testimony in front of the House, I mentioned I was both a diver since age 12 and a commercial lobsterman since 1984. That testimony certainly was written from a commercial fisherman's view and not really from a view of a diver. Today is of a diver. In 1985 to 1986, I went to commercial dive school in Houston, Texas. After graduating, I missed home and came back to New Hampshire and did both commercial diving and worked as a lobsterman. As a diver, I was asked many commercial lobstermen to either locate or untangle pots. As one being very comfortable under the water, I can tell you from experience that locating is way different than retrieving. I also dove and snorkeled for recreation just to see what I could see. I believe that I can safely say that when divers say they want to clean up lobster pots on the ocean floor, they have not tried to drag them far, or at the very least, unbury the pots that have settled deep into the sand or the mud. It takes a tremendous amount of energy and a lot of work to clean up the ocean scuba diving. Never mind the hazards and dangers to go with diving. I know this. I've seen this. Any diver can say the ocean floor is littered with lost pots, but who's going to see it or not see it? Yes, there are lost lobster pots, but there are also lost bikes, fishing poles, cables, and grills. I have yet to hear divers mention cleaning up this other stuff. Commercial fishermen take trash out of the ocean every day, whether it's fishing string, grills, or balloons. We are not asking for anything special. For 29 years, there has been an organized cleanup of the seacoast of New Hampshire with full support of New Hampshire Fish and Game and its lobster license harvesters, plus many, many volunteers. I can safely say that on that day, the lobster pots and other trash washes up on the beach from the winter storms will outweigh the few pots and trash that any diver can safely retrieve.
So that's your 3 minutes?
Okay.
If you have it in writing too as well?
Yep,
Okay.
I sent it.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee? I gotta get a little stricter because they're gonna keep
Oh, no,
me out
it's
of the
fine.
room. Yeah.
I should have read quicker. It's fine.
Question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. With relation to what you were just talking about, could you explain how the baiting of the traps is part of the sustainability of the species?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
In my prior testimony, I think I said that, and it was.
We weren't there, though, so-
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's okay, but
Thanks.
you'll have a copy of it. Certainly worth reading, I hope.
Thank you.
That, we're feeding the lobsters. We're not just we are feeding the lobsters every day, 24 hours a day for the entire season. Every day those lobster pots are baited, and every lobster that comes in there, they're not coming in to say hi, they're coming in to eat. They're fed every day.
Further questions?
Follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. When you pull a pot out of the water and you examine each of the lobsters, how can you tell which ones are breeding and which ones are not?
You flip over the female, and she either has eggs or she has a V-notch saying in the past she has carried eggs. And if she doesn't have a V-notch and has eggs, we notch the proper fin and throw it back over for her to continue breeding.
Last question, Mr. Chair.
Your last question.
Is it possible to flip over the female inside in the water under?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and be able to see the eggs?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Eric Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Eric Anderson. I have supplied you with a copy of my testimony, and I'll try and paraphrase it. I have been a commercial fisherman for over 50 years in the state of New Hampshire. I went to the House hearings, and I've been to them in the last 5 years. And as you've heard, this piece of legislation has been opposed by Fish and Game, the Commission, the New Hampshire Fish and Game Commission, our association, and the Marine Advisory Committee, and consistently been opposed to this legislation. I mean, allowing the taking of divers by means is just not good policy. We've sustained this fishery for over 100 years in the means that it's being taken right now. And I think that's been, you know, it's a sustainable fishery as it exists and in long standing. And it's been opposed. You've heard that it's been opposed, or that it's here because there is an allowance of taking lobsters by diving in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But I believe, and I think Colonel Jordan expressed that's to the regrets of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And if they had to do it again, they would probably not allow it. And take this piece of legislation in the state of Maine, it wouldn't be allowed to be written on a piece of paper. I went through and made 15 points, which I'm not going to read, but this legislation is just riddled with inconsistencies. It is not written well. It's been amended a variety of times, and I haven't, you know, I passed my comments to you. It was just expressed by Damon Frampton. This is a trap fishery, but in a life cycle of a lobster, for 7 years, the industry feeds those lobsters until they get to a point that they can be harvested. They spend millions of dollars in the cost of bait to propagate this resource. And I think there should be some credit given to the industry for what they do. This fishery would not sustain itself without this resource would not sustain itself without the fishery. And through the course of 7 years, we feed those as they molt, as they grow, and we finally get to a point that they're harvested. We throw back the shorts, we throw back the eggers, we notch the eggers, so that, and that lasts for 3 or 4 years that notch stays there and that lobster is not taken. So I think the industry is very responsible in how they treat this resource. And they do it respectively. And there's been plenty of studies to say, if you take the traps away from the areas that they exist, the lobsters go with them. They follow the traps. These are not traps. They're feeding stations. Call them what you may, but they are not a trap.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
And I just want to, you know, one other closing comment. I hope this committee in the Senate treats this piece of legislation better than the House did. We went, and for 3.5 hours, there was testimony on both sides of this issue. Okay, at the end of 3.5 hours, there was, I'll be quite frank, there were ringers brought into the committee that heard not one word of testimony and voted on this legislation, and the House side. And without those ringers, and I'll call them as it be, without those ringers, it would have not passed out of the House. In the full House.
I'm running out of time. I got a lot of speakers left, so I'm going to open it up to questions rather than further testimony.
And a copy of what was handed out on the full House floor is and it's full of false information. So I appreciate it. I'm sorry.
I appreciate your.
We're very passionate about this
I understand it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Ward.
Question, Mr. Speaker?
Sure.
Yes.
One question.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I was looking through your testimony, and on page 2 of your testimony, I'm looking at the 13th point.
Yep.
There, it looks like this Saturday, April 8th, your organization is going to clean up coastline of derelict gear, and it says that's something that you've done annually.
Yes, we're on record.
So derelict gear is are you saying that the derelict gear is attended to by your organization?
Yes, ma'am. The industry assembles itself as they have for 30 years, and they go annually to clean up the beaches of New Hampshire. And because we respect our coastline, we maintain that we're responsible for that fishing gear that comes ashore, and we collect it and we dispose of it. So it's not that it's not that we don't do anything about this issue. I think for 30 years, we've been very responsible to show up and take care of this issue for the gear that's come ashore. And I thank you for noting that.
Thank you for your
May
testimony.
I follow up, Mr. Chair?
No follow-up. I said it was one question. We're running out of time, Senator. I'm going to call for Mr. Ward Bryan. Byrne, welcome.
I'd like to thank you, senators, for being present today. I'm the captain, owner, operator of fishing vessel Sugar Daddy. I operate out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. This is my third time here for testimony. And as you've heard before, this bill is morphed and rolled. And I'll be as eloquent as I can. As a fisherman, I feel as though this bill is rolled into a big giant pile of manure, is what it amounts to, as a fisherman. The facts are that most of this propaganda that's been put before these committees prior to today is out and out lies. It's just impossible for any fisherman to lose 10% of his gear every year and still be in business. It's just impossible. To think that the New Hampshire waters dump derelict gear at 200,000 traps a year is just insane. We wouldn't be in business. And I hope that dispels that myth that we're dumping trash. There was another, I wrote down a bunch of stuff, but I'm just going to talk off the hip. There was, prior to this, there was testimony that we cut our lobster traps off and we collect insurance money to get new traps. Again, that big pile of manure. At what point is a fisherman regulated to the hilt where he can't move, wiggle, or even worth fishing anymore? And this bill is another example of that pile of manure. We fishermen have had enough. We're under the gun from the right whales. We have windmills in our future. And on top of it all, this diving bill, if any one of us fishermen wanted to do something different in the ocean or add something new to the ocean, we'd be under a biological study by NOAA for years, decades. There's no biological study or any studies that show that this fishery is healthy. There's no facts. It's all hearsay. And I would encourage that the senators in front of me today help us as fishermen, because we need your help. We need to stop this nonsense of these radical bills. I think the colonel talked about it. He's fed up with this stuff. And I can speak for every fisherman in this room. We've had enough of the big pile of manure. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Thank you for your testimony. Seeing none. Thank you. Jim Titan? Is it Titan? Titone? Tintone? Titone. Very good Irish name. Welcome.
Good morning, senators. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide testimony here today. My name is Jim Titone. I'm from Seabrook, New Hampshire. I've been involved in the lobster industry since 1965. I'm going to try to be quick here. As part of the influence in getting this Bill 442 passed in the House, this document, which is attached to my testimony, was part of the influence to get this bill approved. This document is full of misleading information, inaccurate information, and untruths. Now, one of the things it says here, there's over 3 million lobster traps on the bottom of the Gulf of Maine, with 250,000 more going every year. If you look at Billy Marconi's number of $150 per trap, that means there's almost $500 million worth of lobster traps sitting in the bottom of the Gulf of Maine. This industry could not sustain those kind of losses and continue. Now, another fallacy in here is that New Hampshire doesn't have any programs to clean up the environment. Well, down at the Yankee Co-op down in Seabrook, we have this, it's also in my testimony, we have this container which is sponsored by New Hampshire Fish and Game, which is under the program of Fishing for Energy, where derelict gear, retired gear, all gets disposed of and gets disposed of properly. New Hampshire is the only lobster producing state that has an annual and organized coastwide cleanup by fishermen. And New Hampshire is the only lobster producing state that charges a supplemental fee to its license if license holder does not show up at this cleanup, at the annual cleanup. Another misinformation in there is the bill is saying any trap that is untethered to a vertical line to a buoy is considered a lost trap. Now, we generally fish trawls. I generally fish 8 to 10 traps per trawl. So I only have vertical lines on each end, which could be over 600 feet apart. So all those traps in the middle are not tethered to a buoy. And so because that bill says it has to be tethered to a buoy, somebody could consider that trap as lost, open up the door, and release all the contents of that trap. That ain't right. You're going to have a lot of people in the water that don't understand this fishery and not going to understand that this is a possibility of happening. The other thing I have here is, I have in my photo. This is a photo, it's pretty poor, of a diver underwater. This is his arm. This is a lobster that he's grabbed. As you can see, this black part here are eggs from the lobster. All this cloudy area is the debris and sediment that this lobster kicked up in its struggle to maintain its habitat. Now, this lobster's only purpose in life is to maintain and secure those eggs. By this handling of this lobster and then releasing it, now you have this lobster out in the open, it's subject to predation, and also this lobster, under the stress that it just had from the violent encounter of getting out of its habitat, can abort its eggs. Next year, we're going to be hit with the new regulation to increase the minimum size of the lobsters. And this is only to increase the egg production so we can build up stock resiliency. So we have the lobster industry, the crab industry, doing a heavy lifting in trying to sustain this lobster population. And you're going to have an activity that could jeopardize our egg lobsters in aborting their eggs. It's a contrary to what the regulations are going to be. Regardless of how small a percentage or how small a number of lobsters is going to be taken by diving, those lobsters are taken in an unsustainable manner, and it's a deterrent to the sustainability of this valuable resource. And I would urge you to vote no on this bill for the sake of sustaining this valuable resource for the state of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Tim Noonan. Take over. I'm not going to take questions.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name's Tim Noonan. I'm general manager of Yankee Fishermen's Cooperative in Seabrook. I'm really saddened why I'm here. A little bit about myself. After a stint in the Air Force, I've worked in finance for 29 years. I came to the cooperative as a bookkeeper. I moved up to controller. Now I'm running the place. It's a passion-filled industry, and I take my job with passion, okay? I didn't get that passion from bookkeeping. I got that passion from the hardworking men and women that I employ or are sustaining the seacoast. They're overregulated, they're underpaid, they have high costs of fuel, bait, permits. These are all obstacles to them. They're burdened by catch limits. In my opinion, allowing that to grow is setting a precedent. My gut tells me it's opening floodgates. It's not going to be 3. It's going to be 5. It's going to be 10. Once it gets passed, that's it. I'm representing the wholesalers and the retailers, and I wanted to be here today because of that. And I'm going to go fast here because I want these gentlemen heard. This is affecting not only their industry, it's affecting my industry as a wholesaler and a retailer. Instead of government helping an unenforceable law And it is not enforceable. You heard the Colonel. We need to help the New Hampshire fishing industry grow. We have 16 miles of coastline. I've heard Massachusetts, I've heard Maine, I've heard Rhode Island, I've heard New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a transplant. But they're bigger. And Maine doesn't allow this. We need to establish a brand, not only state, but national, worldwide, that signifies New Hampshire caught. And I'm going to be part of that because I believe in it. And I believe in these men, and I believe in these women, and I believe in the hotels, the restaurants. We have a tourism industry. If their catches are affected, it's going to affect everybody. It will affect all of us. So I thank you for your time.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Peter Flanagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak today. I left my notes behind. My name is Peter Flanagan. I live in Rye. I've been a commercial fisherman for over 65 years. Scuba diver certified over 50 years. I was educated as an aquatic biologist. I can speak to some of these issues from a number of angles. This issue has always bothered me primarily from the safety issue. We're talking about incompatible uses in the same water column. I've had the unfortunate experience of finding a dead scuba diver. That's not something I'd ever want anybody else to go through. I dread it every day when I see something black on the surface, whether it be a log or whatever it is. Deja vu. So I wouldn't encourage somebody to fly their hot air balloon from the Manchester Jetport. I wouldn't tell somebody to go skateboarding on 93. So I wouldn't tell anybody to go scuba diving in the area where commercial fishermen are operating. Commercial boats, it's not a relaxed exercise. We're hauling through the gear as fast as we can, haul as many as we can a day. We get paid by the pound we put on the scale. We don't get paid by the hour. So we're going as fast as we can. Our deckhands literally run to keep the traps off the railing, put them on deck. When we're setting back, I have a trap leaving the deck about every 7 seconds. So to talk about maintaining a written logbook, I can't write that fast. We fish all trawls. I can't make 300 or 400 entries a day in a paper logbook. If anybody's ever tried to keep a paper logbook on a boat, it's good for about 10 days, and it turns to pulp. So this proposal came from somebody that has no idea what goes on a commercial lobster vessel. From the biological standpoint, we don't have enough numbers to make an accurate assessment of that. We know that it's not going to be a minimum of 3 lobsters a day. We don't know what the maximum is. Nobody's going to feed their family and their neighbors with 3 lobsters. Unless you're going to give them a couple lobster bisque and they'll never come back. That might be a good thing. But there are too many holes in this proposal. New Hampshire's a traditional state. Harvesting lobsters with traps is a tradition. I hope you'll vote to maintain that tradition and decide that this proposal should not go forward. I could go on, but I'm sure the clock's ticking. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I might end up having to recess this because we're starting to run out of time. Are there any questions for this gentleman right now? Thank you very much. I got a lot left, and I have 3 more bills that I have to go through that are just as. Ben Ricker? Ben, I'm going to have to really keep you to the 3 minutes. I'm sorry. We got a lot of people coming.
Speak the right way.
Yeah.
I've been fishing my entire life, other than a stint in the service, 65, 70 years.
I might just have to.
As far as this law goes, it's completely unenforceable. As you heard from the colonel, there's no way in hell they can enforce it. I think the safety issue for the divers, you can't see them. A lot of them don't have flags up. All of a sudden you're hauling along on a 10-trap, 20-trap trawl. All of a sudden you'll see bubbles. You know there's a diver there someplace, but you don't know where. Somebody's going to get killed there sooner or later. We got paddle boarders out there and kayakers that you don't even see them when it's blowing a little bit until they're right on top of you. I think this is a dangerous situation, this bill. I just don't think it should be here in New Hampshire. As far as lost gear goes, I'd like to have a nickel for every hour I've spent dragging for my lost gear. Always get it back, but it takes a lot of time sometimes, even with the GPSs and everything. It takes time. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony
That's short
and for
enough.
the brevity. I appreciate it. Let's see here. Jason Limos?
Good morning, Senator. Morning,
Welcome,
Chair.
Jason.
Thank you for the time. I am a third-generation lobsterman. My family has been lobstering since the 1940s out of New Hampshire. So I grew up in the industry. I am a commercial fisherman, and this bill would be a detriment to us. Money out of my pocket. It's hard right now to make make ends meet at this point with the economy and the challenges that we have, as the other fellow fishermen have already shared. I hope that you guys would listen to our voices and take that to the floor in opposition of this bill. If you thought you were going to vote for it, that you would change your minds and listen to all the fishermen that are here. This is an increased effort on the fishery that is not needed at this time. We have been real good stewards of the ocean. As we are out every day, we know the ocean like the back of our hand. And I'm just appalled to think that we have to come up here, take a day off and to do this, just because some people wanted to raise a bill like this up through the food chain. A lot of language in the bill, as everybody has spoken, is definitely questionable, how it would be enforced. And you know, we are the farmers. We've been farming the oceans for many, many years. My family has, and it's sustainable fishery as it is now. To have a diver just go down and pluck them off the floor and not feed them, bait the traps and do all that stuff is just ridiculous in my eyes. I lost no traps last year, just so you guys know. I fished 10 trap trawls out of my 26-foot Duffy that I fish, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony and for your brevity. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Peter Wellix? Or Wellix or Wellen? Or Wella?
It's Whalen.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. I know you're short on time. My name is Peter Whalen. I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I run a charter boat service there for the past 15 years. And I got to tell you, the fellows behind me, I also serve on several federal boards, New England Marine Fisheries. I'm on the committee here in New Hampshire. The lobster industry is one of the most sustainable industries right now that we have. A lot of the groundfish fishery people have moved out of it into the lobster industry, and this is one of the few commercial fisheries that we have left in New Hampshire. And this bill jeopardizes that industry. You've heard from Fish and Game, from law enforcement, from everyone, what a detriment this bill is. It's unenforceable. The lobstermen behind me are some of the most hardworking people in New Hampshire. For 50+ years, they've run a sustainable fishery here in the state. It's the most highly regulated industry by federal and state standards. We change trap sizes, gauge sizes, everything to make those lobsters grow and be harvested. To have divers go down with tickle sticks and disturb the lobsters is just, it's wrong. It shouldn't happen. The other thing key thing is we only have 18 miles of coastline. You're setting yourself up in the state for disaster here. To have 100 divers in an area off a beach competing with rod and reel fishermen like myself, commercial lobstermen, it's going to be a disaster. This bill is a non-starter. You should, put it aside and move on. Everyone in New Hampshire has a right to take lobsters. They can get a 5-trap license, go out and lobster. And I've done that for years. So everyone has that right. It's not like we're excluding any group or person in the state. So I wish that you'd find this bill inexpedient to legislate. And thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. All right. Jared McIntyre? I just finished this page right here, so.
Hey, my name's Jared. So the way fishing works is there's a lot of areas we can only haul at certain tides and no tide. So at dead low or at high tide and the changing tides, you got an hour to haul your gear. And this is probably where the diver's going to be on Newcastle and in the river. And they're only going to be able to dive at the slack tide too, because they're not going to be able to maneuver down there when the tide's running. So in these areas like Newcastle, when that tide slacks up, everyone comes running to haul their stuff. But if there's a diver there with their flag up, we can't go within 500 feet of them. So that means, oh, I guess I can't make my day's living today because the diver decided to play, which doesn't seem right. So that's what I wanted to say about that.
Appreciate your testimony.
It just seems like a license to steal. That's kind of how I look at it.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
One question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing that up. Could you just reiterate the, when you see a diver flag up, what's the setback you have to keep
I
around?
believe it's 500 feet, but either way, I mean, you might want to stay farther away. You don't want to risk anything. But that slack tide is key. We get there's a 6-hour tide difference, and we're just waiting for that slack tide most of the time. That's the area we want to be in. That's the same area they're going to want to be because that's in the shallow water, the place they can dive, and that's where the lobsters are. And that's what's going to kill us, is when they're there, I don't get a day's pay because they decided that was a good day to play. So.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it. With that, we're going to recess this hearing until next week. Same time, 9 o'clock. We have a lot more speakers on this, so. And they're going to kick us out, and our next bill is going to be just as fun. Nick, I need you. Yeah, I'm just trying to be fair. I want to be fair. Nick, okay, so everyone that I checked spoke, they didn't speak language. Okay. There is, yeah. So, obviously, the ones that don't want to speak. But anyone that's going to yeah. So with that,
I got a 10:45.
yeah. I want to. I'm not. We're pretty much. I'm not in favor of this even though it's 56. I want to. I was saying 60. I wanted to check it because today was. I wanted to do this because you're the chair. I just want well, that's the whole reason I wanted to call it today, so we have no choice. I think our 69 is that's my point. If you have to do things that I understand.
I agree. That's why we did 16.
I do too. So if you have to all right. We're going to hear the next bill.
Eric, sorry about this.
Okay. Yeah, we got it all. I'm really sorry. You know, the thing is, they're kicking me out of this at 12 o'clock, and I got 3 other controversial things. So, maybe. All right, so we're going to open up the hearing to HB 56. And we'll hear from the prime sponsor.
Oh, it's nice and cool in here.
Oh, it wasn't earlier. Good. All right. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you for having me. For the record, my name is Representative Megan Murray. I represent Hillsborough 37. That's the towns of Amherst and Milford. And I come to you today to present House Bill 56 as amended. House Bill 56 as amended aims to address setting principles and priorities into state statute with should I?
Could I have order in here?
As amended, sets principles and priorities in statute, creating a priority consideration of perennial bodies of water and groundwater aquifers. The calculation noticed within the legislation simply gives us time in the event of a breach of a landfill spill. And time is critical when considering leachate. For those that don't know, leachate is a toxic soup of sorts that, if it were to breach a landfill or there were a landfill liner leak, 5 years is the minimum amount of time in warning that we are asking for when a breach were to occur before groundwater and aquifer sources. In the interest of our natural resources and human health, we have to start somewhere. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have about the piece of legislation in the interest of time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. The questions from the committee. It's up to you.
I do. Hi.
Senator Bertzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Is this a bill that has been based on any of Maine's statutes?
Thank you for the question. So I would say that this is a healthy, let me go back. There are rules within Maine that there are certain issues that come before Maine that have been elucidated in rules. What we are trying to do here in New Hampshire is set something in statute with regard to groundwater and aquifer protection. So that's really what we're looking at here.
Follow?
Follow.
So there's no statute in Maine that's similar to House Bill?
There are pieces and parts of...
Shut the door. Herb, can you shut the door, please? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. There are topics that are germane to Maine, that Maine does have similar types of conversation in their statute. But what we are asking for is, this is really an effort to address what's happening here in New Hampshire and what we believe is right for New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Seeing
Thank
no
you.
further questions. Because we're going to be getting kicked out of this room at 12 o'clock and I still have 2 more bills to hear, we're going to limit it to 2 minutes per speaker, please. And I'm going to be very strict with that, if that's okay. It's just, I don't think it's fair for us, but the fact that we're getting kicked out. So we want everybody to have an opportunity to speak. So with that, we'll hear from our next speaker, which is Kirsten. Yeah. Would you say 2 minutes? 2 minutes, yeah. Sorry for the rush, but we have a time limit. So.
That's okay, Mr. Chair. 2 minutes is all I'll need.
This is the bad guy. When he goes it like this, if I give him a dirty look, that means...
Right. That's all I'll need. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's always a pleasure to testify before you. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch. I'm Director of Public Policy for the Business and Industry Association. I come before you today to register our strong opposition to House Bill 56. If you recall, this bill is very similar to a bill last year, House Bill 1454, which this committee actually killed and then It passed through the Senate, but Governor Sununu vetoed it. And our concerns with this bill are that it would lead to solid waste capacity issues in the state, increased disposal costs for employers and municipalities, and it would harm New Hampshire's business climate. Our concerns stem from the fact that if this bill was passed, it could likely prevent the siting of any new landfills in the state. Although New Hampshire doesn't currently have a solid waste crisis, the state is inevitably going to hit capacity on existing landfills in the future, and this would lead to increased costs for municipalities and employers who have to pay the difference then to send their waste out of state. Further, we believe that this bill would inhibit the solid waste industry's ability to properly manage New Hampshire solid waste. We find that House Bill 56 exemplifies a not in my backyard mentality toward industry, and that it would weaken New Hampshire's climate for business. On the other hand, we think there's a better alternative this year. Senate Bill 61. The difference is that Senate Bill 61 requires studies to be done on these landfills and then subsequently update regulations based on this scientific data from those studies. So we leave it up to the experts. So in conclusion, we think that Senate Bill 61 is the better option. We'd ask that this committee finds House Bill 56 inexpedient to legislate. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your testimony, Kristen. Questions from the committee?
Awesome. She made it just under 2 minutes.
Just under 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Seeing none?
Thank you.
Oh, I take that back. Go ahead, Senator Bristol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Are there any single sites in New Hampshire that would meet the requirements of this bill?
I think that's a better question for DES, as they're the experts, but I think that's the concern, is that this bill was written in a way that it would be very unlikely that sites, you would be able to site a landfill anywhere in the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thanks.
Weldon Bosworth. All right, seeing he's not here, Rep. Peter Bixby. Sorry, Peter, I got a 2-minute gun on you.
Yep. Thank you. For the record, Peter Bixby, Dover Stratford 13. So one of the key things about HB 56 is that we worked with one of the major waste major waste companies in the state, Waste Management, to make sure that nothing in the bill would preclude expansions at existing landfills. So, and Waste Management was pleased with that grandfathering language we put in. So, so there is no threat in this bill to expansions at any of the currently operating landfills. Another thing about this bill is that essentially what it says is that it doesn't, what the 5-year setback does and the exclusion of putting anything above a sand and gravel aquifer does is it protects the surface water bodies, and it protects aquifers that could potentially be rapidly impacted by a landfill leak. But that leaves over 80% of the land area in New Hampshire as still potentially available for making a landfill. I mean, there are other things that might impede a landfill, so you probably don't want to site one in the middle of Manchester, even if the soil is correct there. But most of the soil in New Hampshire is a bedrock base with clay on top of it, and that is good landfill siting territory. So not being able to find a landfill, it would be certainly possible to find a place to put an additional landfill within the restrictions of this bill. So the most important thing is protecting our surface waters, and we feel that is a principle that should be in statute, and protecting our groundwater, and that's the not putting it above a sand and gravel aquifer, also protecting our groundwater. And I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate it. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Representative, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to move these along. Representative David Rockford? Yes. Welcome, Representative. And thank you for your service. Thank you, Peter, as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Rochefort. I represent Grafton One, Republican from Littleton, and I'm here to support this bill. This bill is a common sense approach to siting landfills, which in our community would go a long way in protecting an investment that we have made in our community. The town of Littleton has invested greatly in our river district. We're developing our river district. I know other communities in the state of New Hampshire are developing their river districts and their waterfront areas. And currently, the arbitrary setback of 200 feet, which is from the Daniel Webster statute to Main Street, is we feel inadequate in our community. The HB 56 that's in front of you is a site-specific bill. I think it pairs well with the bill coming out of the Senate, and I believe it would work well to protect the communities who have made significant investments in their communities, revitalizing, cleaning up, and bringing back waterfronts and water areas that were previously polluted from our industrial era past. So I'd urge you to support this, and I will take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Seeing none. Thank you. Rep. Mike Edgar. All right. Rep. Murray. Oh, that's right, you did. Rosemary Rung. Welcome, Representative.
That's okay, thank you. For the record, my name is Rosemary Rung. I'm a representative for the town of Merrimack, which is Hillsborough 12. I'm here because, as many of you know, Merrimack has suffered with PFAS contamination of our groundwater. It originated from an industrial contamination, but we've learned a lot since then about PFAS, and it's in so many consumer products that end up in landfills. And the leachate from those landfills will contain PFAS. And contrary to a previous testimony about the cost that this would incur, I'd like you to consider the cost of having to clean up PFAS from groundwater or surface water. The ratepayers in Merrimack have spent millions and millions of dollars and years to filter our water. Our last PFAS filtration plant went online last week. That doesn't include the tremendous cost to private well owners whose wells have become contaminated, or the millions of dollars spent by DES to address contamination that fell outside the consent decree defined between the state and Saint-Gobain. And I'd like to talk for a second about that. When we talk about distances from water bodies, presently landfills are 200 feet from a water body. Our Shoreline Protection Act calls for 250 feet. So, but in a way, sometimes that number is arbitrary. Because we know in Saint-Gobain and the consent decree with the state is that initial boundary that was defined by the state, we've discovered contamination that has extended far beyond that. So the advantage, and I think the true value of HB 56 is that we're getting away from those arbitrary distances and we're basing it on scientific information. And I think that's extremely important in order to protect our groundwater and our surface water from something that doesn't go away. It is forever, it's cumulative, it's bioaccumulative. And so I think it's imperative on our state to approach these kind of things with an abundance of caution and protect our water at all costs. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Questions from the committee. Representative Alschuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Rung. Nice to see you here. Thank you for taking my question. In the bill, I see you don't have the bill in front of you, but I'm looking at line 9, which is part of the new paragraph that the department shall establish a site-specific setback distance from any new proposed landfill. and the setback distance shall be sufficient to prevent any contaminated groundwater. Can you tell us why you chose to go with a site-specific versus a hard and fast 2-mile radius, 5-mile radius, 10-mile radius?
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Senator, for your question. I'd be happy to answer it. Ground is different. I mean, when we set an arbitrary distance or a consistent distance around a site, we're assuming all of the soil and the hydrogeology within that distance is homogeneous, and it's not. We can go out to any area and pour a bucket of water, and it could seep right in, and go to another area equidistant from a site and find that it puddles. So having it site-specific, we can ensure that any elements of change that might occur are accounted for. I know with the Shoreline Protection Act, for instance, or activities that go around a lake, for example, even septic systems. A septic system sited someplace may fail and leach into that surface water, but equidistance in another area it may not. So I think being able to understand the specific hydrogeology is of value in protecting our natural resources.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony and your service.
Okay, thank you.
Nora Bosworth?
May I hand out the testimony?
I don't. No.
Started. Good morning, Chairman Avard and honorable committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of House Bill 56. My name is Nora Bosworth, and I am the Zero Waste Attorney for Northern New England for the Conservation Law Foundation. HB 56 is a common sense and necessary measure that will ensure that new landfills are sited in appropriate locations where they will not threaten surface waters and ultimately our residents. Site-specific setbacks are needed because landfill liner systems have limited lifespans and can eventually break down and leak. And when they leak, as has been stated, they can release toxic chemicals, including PFAS, into neighboring groundwaters. PFAS are a class of compounds called forever chemicals because they never fully break down in either the environment or our bodies, and their documented health effects are far-ranging and alarming. HB 56 will help protect New Hampshire from the contamination concerns associated with landfills in two important ways. First, the bill will direct landfill development to suitable locations where groundwater does not quickly move and interact with nearby water bodies. And second, the bill will ensure that there is sufficient time to assess and remediate any potential groundwater contamination before it affects a water body. I urge the committee to support this sensible regulation that would protect New Hampshire residents and water bodies from the potential dangers of an ill-placed landfill.
Well done. Good job.
I came in.
All right. Questions from the committee? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. My district has the Coakley landfill. And when the Coakley landfill started leaching out, we had a lot of discussion in the legislature about lined landfills versus unlined landfills. And there was a term of art or a turn of phrase that any landfill, it's not a question of if a landfill, lined or not, will leak, but when. And you mentioned in your presentation that even lined landfills have a lifespan and eventually leak. Do we have a sense of like what the average lifespan really is of a lined landfill, and then what happens then?
Thank you so much for that question.
Thanks.
It's a great question. My understanding is that there are a lot of variables to the fallibility of landfill liner systems, but I've read and cite numerous pieces of literature that state that the lifespans of liner systems are limited, even when they're composite, even when they're double line systems, regardless of the material that are currently used. And the toxicity of the waste and the leachate that seeps out can last centuries and even millennia. So there's no, we can't say after 30 years, the landfill is capped and lined, we don't have to worry about it anymore. The risks of the chemicals that can seep out of the leachate can last into perpetuity.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Pearl.
Thank you. I was trying to decide who to ask this question of, so I'm going to start with you. I'm reading section 2, the new paragraph about the site-specific setback distance. How would an applicant, or DES, actually, the department, require an applicant to make that determination on land that they may not own? Because the landfill site may be on one person's property, but in order to establish that 5-year setback to the perennial water, you might have to intrude on another person's land. How would that work?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but
So let's see if I can explain a little better. You have an applicant that puts in a landfill site, but there may be another person or another landowner that owns between the site of the landfill and the perennial body of water.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that land in between fall into the establishment of whether that would suffer a 5-year travel?
I think you might be getting into the specifics of how the hydrogeologist would do their measurements, and I can't speak to that.
I was looking at it more from a legal aspect, because you couldn't require someone else to provide a core sample of what their property would be.
But I also think that question does get into what the hydrogeologist would do, because you're assuming that to measure it, they would have to go onto the land, and I can't speak to that.
I'll ask DES the same question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Rep. Jared Sullivan? Is it Jared? You're not speaking. Gotcha. Roger that. And you're not speaking. Okay. Department of DES? Mark Sanborn and Mike Wimsat. We got a twofer here. Welcome, gentlemen.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mike Wimsat. I serve as Director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and I'm joined by our Assistant Commissioner, Mark Sanborn, this morning. So thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 56 as amended. We have several concerns about the bill that I'll briefly summarize. And I would note that we do see, as others have suggested, Senate Bill 61 as amended, which I believe is headed to the House. We see that as a more effective way of addressing landfill siting concerns. But to move to our concerns about House Bill 56, with regard to the 5-year travel time distance that it requires the site-specific determination of that, we're unsure, first of all, how that has been determined to be the appropriate standard. And we are concerned about the potential impacts on the future availability of landfill sites in New Hampshire, given the way that it's determined to be identified. And that goes to the second concern, which is that what the bill currently requires is that if you take the highest, if you do a number of tests on the site, you take the highest groundwater seepage velocity that you can detect at the site, and you basically assume that the whole site and everything going to the surface water from there meets those, has that same hydraulic conductivity or seepage velocity. And we believe that that will very likely result in erroneously high estimates of overall site-wide seepage velocity, and would not be reflective of the site at large. So we believe that that would be problematic. Thirdly, it also, the amended bill now identifies that no landfill can be sited over a significant sand and gravel aquifer. But that term, significant sand and gravel aquifer, is not defined, and we believe that would be a problem on implementation because there would need to be a definition for that. Fourthly, the bill provides that certain project improvement allowances could be identified that would effectively reduce that 5-year travel time requirement. But the bill doesn't specify what those particular project improvement allowances might be. And we think that the agency, in order to implement something like that, would need a little more direction. And then with respect to those project improvement allowances, it prohibits them being used for any site where any single measurement of hydraulic conductivity in the aquifer or in the soils at the site is greater than or equal to 1 × 10⁻⁵ centimeters per second. And that is projects concerns similar to what I mentioned before about if you just take one test, it isn't necessarily going to be reflective of the site. It ignores the variability that almost all sites have in terms of soil quality and soil layers. And it also probably might well end up being unnecessarily restrictive. So those summarize our concerns, and I want to turn it over to Mark Sanborn for a few more remarks.
Yes, afternoon, everyone, or morning, everyone. The director did a great job outlining, come to the specific technical outline on a more policy overview perspective. After last session, we were asked this session to be very clear about when it comes to the landfill bills, where we are. So the bill that DES supports is SB 61 as currently amended. All of the other bills on this subject, DES would oppose if asked on opinion. And the reason we support the approach of SB 61 is there's nothing prescribed in there. It gives a clean rulemaking process. It provides funding to do a study. We have a very talented staff. The problem on this subject, they'd have to stop doing a whole bunch of work they're doing right now to be able to concentrate on doing the research and gather the information needed. So that is why we propose to do an outside consultant to come in and be able to do that work in a much shorter amount of time. We have committed to the public that we would take their input for the RFP and the items that should be included in what the study looks at. And during the rulemaking process, we wouldn't be approving any new applications. So the bottom line is we don't feel we and our folks right now have enough information to set any specific standards. And so we're concerned about any bill that does that. We'd rather start with a fresh slate, let us do the research and information and gather the information we need so we can do a rulemaking process which has a public component to it, as you all know, and folks would be able to make their voices heard. But let us start in a place where we can just be completely data-driven, science-based, without anything prescribed as we go about our work. So that is what we have, and the director did a great job giving examples on this bill, why some of the specifics we'd have concerns about it, as opposed to starting with a fresh mandate of gather the data, gather the science, and do a rulemaking that makes sense for New Hampshire. Okay. So with that, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Altshuler.
Yes. Thank you. I think I'm a little confused about the juxtaposition of Senate Bill 61 to House Bill 56, because I'm reading, and we were all here for the hearings for 61, so I think we're all on the same page there, and it is the position of the Senate. It seems like this bill actually complements Senate Bill 61, as it offers some opportunities to use exactly what we have outlined in 61 to come up with these rules and parameters. So, hiring an independent hydrologist actually fits into the statement of purpose, which are very, very similar. Is it just that, these, where do you think they fight each other? Because I see them as being a dovetail, and I'm confused about why you feel like they're acrimonious.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Senator. So they are the same in the sense that they both direct DES to do rulemaking to address the issue of landfill siting and setbacks, specifically setbacks from surface waters.
But what really sets 56 apart in that regard is that 61 tells us to do the work, get some very significant and what we think will be important input from an independent contractor who will review our siting regulations. But 56 then tells us what to do. It tells us make rules that establish a 5-year setback. And 61 doesn't say that. 61 says to take a more measured approach to it, try to determine what those setbacks ought to be, how they ought to be determined using site-specific data. And candidly, 61 doesn't contain what we see as flaws in 56, which ask us to consider what we think is data that we would never consider in any of the work that we're doing. We would never take one measurement at a site and say the whole site is reflected by that measurement. We always try to get as much data as we can at a site to make a determination about how the site behaves hydrogeologically. So those are really fundamental flaws that we see in the bill.
And I'll just add, I mean, at this point, the amount of bills and the amount of different folks who have come forward with what they believe is the right approach to that, we're dubious about starting anywhere other than let our folks work with professional contractors to come up with data and a scientific approach that doesn't start from an assumed position or assumed approach. There will be a public process during the rulemaking that allow folks to come in and voice any concerns or any disagreements they have. The bottom line is we were happy to see a bill come forward that allows DES to start the rulemaking process without any assumptions built into it in terms of how we were approaching it. And that's why that's the approach we'll be able to voice support for. Any of the others that predetermines an approach for us in our rulemaking, we're not going to be able to support.
Thank you very much for your testimony, gentlemen. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tim White.
Good morning, Chairman Evert and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to provide comments to the committee regarding HB 56 as amended. My name is Tim White. I'm a vice president at Sanborn Head & Associates, an engineering and geosciences consulting firm here in Concord, New Hampshire. I'm a hydrogeologist at Sanborn Head, and I've worked in the field of geology for over 21 years. In the short time here, I just want to reiterate that I agree with some of the comments that have been made in previous testimony that the 5-year travel time is arbitrary. The use of the maximum calculated seepage velocity is unrealistic and inconsistent with professional practice. It's likely not representative of site conditions nor down gradient of a landfill. The use of the 10 to the minus 5 centimeter per second hydraulic conductivity value, that limit, using that as a limit, is unlikely to be found on any size site where a landfill could be developed in New Hampshire. But I want to focus on the allowances that seek to reduce the setback to perennial waters. These are the project improvement allowances the bill references, and they enable the project, they're proposed to enable the project to allow the setback to be met. But it's unclear, and I think it's important that the committee recognize that there appear to be some components of this. So I'm sure you'll hear other testimony today that have been brought over from Maine. But one of the key factors is this project allowances. But tying it to that 10 to the minus 5 centimeter per second value does so in a way that potentially makes this unworkable in New Hampshire, and I anticipate that it would be unworkable. But the key difference is that the Maine rules allow for a possible of a variance for this requirement in a way that HB 56 does not. And that's a key distinction. So this is not a Maine bill. The underpinnings of the Maine bill are not brought in with this, and I think that's a key distinction. Further, the Maine rules regarding the maximum conductivity limit apply only to the area within the solid waste boundary and do not apply to all the soils in the property. So we've referred to it as a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm concerned with the project allowances. It's a one-size-fits-none approach. I urge the committee to oppose it.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your final statement. I can allow one question from the committee. Seeing none, thank you. Wayne Morrison.
Welcome, Wayne. Morning. Some copies of my testimony. I'll start off by saying, for the record, my name is Wayne Morrison, and I'm president of a grassroots organization that's been focused on environmental issues and business issues in the North Country. We believe that the current landfill setback requirement of 200 feet is inadequate, is unprotective, and dangerous. And with all due respect to DES, who has a very difficult challenge in doing what they're chartered to do, the current regulation has been in place for over 30 years. And in all that time, despite advances in technology and science, and our growing understanding of the health risks from water contamination, our criteria for siting a landfill has remained untouched. In 1991, no one knew about the dangers of PFAS and many of the other toxic leachate chemicals that are abundantly found in landfills, but we do today. We cannot go back in time, but we can take decisive action to better protect New Hampshire's future today. Now, in fact, is the right time to get this process right. There are currently no applications in front of DES for a new landfill, and the recently published solid waste biennial report shows that we have plenty of capacity through 2034, and in fact, well beyond. House Bill 56 ensures that site-specific criteria are in place and requires no additional testing that applicants don't already have to do. This bill does not ban landfills. It doesn't restrict how many landfills we have, and it doesn't restrict who operates our landfills. What it does do is ensure that they are located safely. We should never forget that despite the latest technologies available and the best-intentioned landfill operators, accidents still occur. Leachate spills, people make mistakes, switches and valves fail, double-lined materials deteriorate, and leaks eventually happen. When they do,
10 seconds.
The only thing protecting us, our rivers, lakes, wetlands, and drinking water supplies from this leachate chemicals is the site-specific criteria you have before you today. I ask you to support House Bill 56, just as a large bipartisan majority in the House has. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Let's see, Eric Steinhauser? Steinhauser, my apologies.
Good afternoon, Chairman Abbott, committee members. Thank you for hearing my testimony in opposition to HB 56. For the record, my name is Eric Steinhauser. I'm a senior vice president and principal with Sanborn Head & Associates. I'm a professional engineer in New Hampshire. I have 35 years experience in the fields of solid waste engineering. And I've been working in New Hampshire for the last 19 years. For the record, please know I'm on the Waste Management Council for New Hampshire, and I also represent the Council on the New Hampshire Solid Waste Working Group. My comments today are mine and not reflective of the Council or the Working Group. My career is focused on remediating contaminated sites and designing protective solid waste disposal facilities. It is unlined landfills, not lined facilities, that are the problems for groundwater contamination. I won't repeat what others have said or might say, but let you know that since I've been in practice, there have been countless technical publications about landfills, some pro, some con, but the overwhelming consensus is that properly designed, constructed, operated landfills are protective of the environment. There is extensive research and testing that documents geosynthetic components of landfills have service lives in hundreds of years. Bills like HB 56 will prohibit the development of quality solid waste disposal options in New Hampshire. Should there be a natural disaster like we've seen recently in the Midwest and South, New Hampshire needs to have solid waste facilities so we're prepared for potential future natural disasters. I believe that the legislature should empower DES to promote reasonable, technically appropriate, and environmentally protective rules, not restrictive statutes that might be unrealistic for future development. In essence of time, HB 56 eliminates or negates the need for professional judgment by requiring the use of outlier values or a value of subsurface area that may be unrelated to the landfill performance or development. Such a requirement is contrary to scientific and engineering practices for evaluating the body of data collected for a project. The application of a highest rate to calculate a distance of travel is not scientific.
10 seconds.
HB 56 is not applying scientific principles to landfill siting. Rather, it's establishing landfill prohibitions. In summary, HB 56 takes a non-scientific, draconian approach that will prevent development of new landfill capacity and undermines the practice of landfill engineering in New Hampshire, and eliminates the design professional's ability to reasonably apply site-specific data, industry standards, guidelines, science and engineering to siting and designing environmental protective landfills in New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Catherine Corky, Sierra Club.
Oh,
Welcome.
hello, hello. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for letting me speak today, and it's great to see you all. My name is Catherine Corkery. I am representing New Hampshire Sierra Club, and our motto is to enjoy, protect, and explore. And I have for you something of the short version from Dr. Adam Finkel to put in front of you to review for this bill. HB 56, New Hampshire Sierra Club, has been working with a coalition of groups, and we support this bill and wanted to lift up Dr. Finkel's work, as well as Dr. Cynthia Walter, that you should have gotten emails from both. Neither one of them could be here today. But I wanted to just have a few remarks regarding the bill. This is a subject well worn in this committee, and this bill has been an evolution that has brought together a number of different voices to address this issue. And I'm hearing from the opposition that there isn't enough testing there's too much testing required. I'm really confused by that. What I think this bill is trying to do is use the belt and suspender approach in the front end, identifying places that are appropriate for landfills, so that it's not placed in, like we saw in Coakley, a sand pit. Those are the porous soils are what we're trying to avoid. And we have heard from this chamber in particular that they did not want to have the one-size-fits-all approach, and that the site-specific approach was desirable. So I just wanted to provide that background, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much. We're actually running out of time, so we appreciate your testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
It's written testimony. Thank you. Matt Leahy from the Forest Society. Welcome, Matt.
Good morning, Senator. I have written testimony, which I will hand out in lieu of
Great, that'd
my
be perfect.
oral
Thank you. Yeah,
testimony.
we still have two more bills.
I'll be happy to answer any questions if.
Well, if you can speak from the heart. You got 30 seconds if you want.
I think the testimony will cover
All
it.
right.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it, and thank you for considering our interest of time here. Let's see, Nikki DeLude. Did I say that right?
You did.
I did.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for having me here. I am Nikki DeLude Roy. I am a professional geologist in the state of New Hampshire with about 20 years of experience working on landfills in the state and across the country. I have written testimony. I'll try to make my comments very brief. This bill overly simplifies the importance of a genuine understanding of geology. The discussion is focused on prohibiting landfills over sand and gravel aquifers, but it includes measurements in bedrock as well, and it relies on a single maximum conclusion based on overburden and bedrock. Those things are not the same and can't be considered the same way. In addition, as proposed, HB 56 would create language in statute that the DES has acknowledged would tie the hands of the experts that are within DES by pulling out one setback to perennial water bodies and leaving others, and placing that setback in statute. The experts at DES would be prevented from being able to equally consider the factors specific to landfill siting that vary from place to place. Landfill siting rules should be left to the experts at DES to develop in their solid waste regulations for the state. So for that reason, I urge the committee to reject HB 56. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? One question?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. And I appreciate your professional background on this. You just said in your testimony that factors vary from place to place and that, you know, we want to leave space open, I guess, to set a minimum standard, if I understood you correctly. But the formula that is in here, isn't that's recommended by the EPA? So do you think we should have some baseline standards?
So thank you for the question. I don't know what the EPA reference is, but I will say that the reliance on a single measured value is not the standard of practice in any guidance document, EPA or state. We typically look at average measurements across a site that better reflect, or even statistical averages or statistical measurements, because measurements will vary across a geologic setting, across a site, and groundwater will flow as an average through that. It will not just follow a single maximum value or velocity, for example. So it's really that single measurement reliance in this bill that I object to, and that I think very much ties DES's hands in a way that is not reflective of good science. I was going to say. Thank you.
Questions? She's good. Okay. Sorry about that. I had to go and talk with a school group, so my apologies. That's one of the best parts of our job, by the way. Okay, so Rob Grillo, the CMN engineers, you oppose? Good morning and welcome, and I've been charged with keeping you to a strict 2 minutes. So.
Okay. My name is Bob Grillo. I'm a principal at CMA Engineers in Portsmouth. I practiced landfill engineering in New Hampshire since 1986. I'm a licensed professional engineer and geologist in the state, and I have a master's degree in geotechnical engineering. I'd like to spend my time perhaps answering some of the questions that the senator had earlier. You asked about the lifespan of the liner. Eric touched on that. I'd like to expand a little bit. The research indicates the lining material will last at least 500 years in the ground without any deterioration, so that material, if unearthed 500 years from now, will meet all the current specs. After that, it'll start to get a little more brittle. It'll still function, but it's going to be there a very, very long time. Next was on leakage. We know all landfills leak. Well, I'd like to explain how the double liner system works. The second liner isn't just a redundant liner. It's also used by rule to monitor what gets through the first liner or around the first liner. And the rules require that be monitored essentially continuously, and the flows have to be very low. So that the idea there is you're almost constantly monitoring the lining system to make sure it's performing as it's intended. If the flows are high, you've got to find the problem and fix it, or the landfill, at least that part of the landfill, would have to be closed. So the potential, for a large leakage event is very small. And lastly, the toxicity of the leachate. I just think it's worth noting that since the 1980s, all the federal and state rules have worked very hard to remove the toxic material from the solid waste stream. All the hazardous waste goes to a separate spot. The state has done all sorts of work getting electronics and metals and other things out of the waste stream. And as a result, the toxicity of the leachate, that comes through that trash, is very dilute. I mean, we test for 150 compounds or whatever, Tim could tell you, and almost all of them we meet groundwater standards. I mean, there's a few blips. So the extent that there's stuff in the leachate, it's things in household waste that
10 seconds.
that people provide. So I think there's not a lot of potential for damage, and there's been no indication of serious leakage through a landfill liner system that required remediation in the 37 years we've been using these landfills in the state. So.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Lisa? Lisa Jacob?
You get two Lisas.
Two Lisas. Lisa and Lisa Turner?
Yes.
Okay. And you are our last speakers.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Lisa Jacob, and I'm testifying against HB 56. I'm a licensed geologist in Maine and principal at CV and Mahar Engineers in Cumberland, Maine, here with my colleague Lisa Turner, professional engineer and licensed soil scientist. We've worked for New Hampshire and Maine clients beginning in the mid-'80s on dozens of landfill sites in these and many other states. I'm here today to discuss the differences between Maine and New Hampshire solid waste rules and laws, since we've come to understand that HB 56 was developed in part based on Maine solid waste rules. Our primary concern is that the bill seeks to make law what we think should be regulation. Both Maine and New Hampshire law state general protective goals for the environment and rely on technical experts in hydrogeology and landfill design and DES professional staff to establish rules for evaluating and permitting potential landfill sites through rulemaking. Maine law speaks to surface water, saying the department shall require the applicant to provide evidence demonstrating that proximity of any classified surface water bodies to proposed solid waste facility has been considered during the site selection process. New Hampshire law is equally general. It requires department shall not issue a permit for a solid waste facility unless the facility meets the terms and conditions required in rules adopted by the commissioner. We believe the current law is the correct approach, and as others have stated this morning, the concepts in this bill would be better evaluated and revised in the rulemaking process where performance-based criteria can be crafted. Comparison of the bill to Maine rules shows several ways in which the bill is excessively restrictive. First, it requires travel time to be calculated based on the highest seepage rate of any test site, as has been discussed. Maine rules allow the use of generally accepted hydrogeologic practice and professional judgment. Two, it limits the number of travel time allowances or credits for engineering improvements to 3, and Maine rules do not limit the number of credits, and so encourage innovation in design. And it prohibits the use of allowances, improvement allowances, if soils anywhere on the property have hydraulic conductivity. Maine rules require only soils beneath the waste.
Yeah.
I urge you to vote no. Thank you so much for
You
your
can pass
time.
the baton now. She has 2 minutes as well. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I think Maine solid waste management rules were developed in 1989, and their objective performance criteria have allowed technological advances to be implemented to improve the safety and reliability of landfills. By including performance criteria in rules rather than law, it is possible to grant a waiver when a technical evaluation shows there will be no adverse impacts to the environment. And I think that's the most critical thing here, is that once it's in law, there's no opportunity for a waiver. So many, many landfill sites get a waiver on this, that, or the other, that with the engineering support, you get a good site out of a hydrogeologically not perfect site. There are no perfect landfill sites, and I think that that's something, you can't just say, oh, we can't do it here, we'll go find another perfect site there. To get the setbacks, the 200-foot setbacks, you're looking at a very long way. Think about walking through the woods and having at 400 feet between streams, you're standing in the middle and you don't get any landfill area. So the capacity is critically needed. I've heard you have 7 years left on your landfill. You're about 3 years behind on starting to permit a new landfill from our perspective. So we urge the committee to vote no on this bill, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Wow. twofer in under 4 minutes. Well done. I'll allow for one more question, if that's okay, because we got 2 more bills still to hear, and we are going to get kicked out at exactly 12 o'clock. So I'll ask you to be brief, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Since you both testified, I have a question for each of you.
I'm asking one question, please.
One question per,
Just one
per
question.
person?
Senator, just one question, please.
Okay. So then I'll summarize all of my questions and ask you to elaborate on what makes a site acceptable but imperfect.
So some of the thing comes with the allowance protocol. If you start adding better engineering to the site, you start adding the double liner, you start putting in clay cutoff walls, you put in under drains, you start doing engineering improvements to the site to get to where the site is going to give you the travel time to sensitive receptors. It's that kind of thing. So the site may not have 200 feet, may not have every single spot that has the lowest permeability that you'd like to see, but when you add the engineering controls, you get to where you've got a site that is going to, with the engineering controls, you're going to protect the environment. And that's what the goal is. And you can do that with the support of the engineering improvements.
Thank you, ladies, for your testimony. And with that, we're going to close the hearing on HB 56. And we're going to open up the hearing. HB 219, we'll hear from the prime sponsor, please. Thank you very much. Representative Bose, you have the floor.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning, colleagues. For the record, Representative Michael Bose, Rockingham District 5, the town of Epping, Chair of House Science, Technology, and Energy, here to introduce House Bill 219, which passed ST&E 20-0.
Wow.
And the House on the consent calendar. It's a totally bipartisan bill.
Congratulations.
Fun fact, back in the 1880s and 1890s, the Public Utilities Commission regulated railroads and telegraph systems. Equally fun fact, according to statute, they still do. But in reality, of course, they do not. So the PUC asked me to file this bill to clean up statute and remove from statute those laws that required the PUC to regulate railroads and telegraph lines. The original bill repealed about 10 RSAs. But during testimony before the House, we learned that several of those RSAs needed to be preserved, just recodified, so that the Department of Transportation would actually be the responsible regulatory body. So the way the bill was constructed by OLS, we set up a study committee to look at a couple of these RSAs to determine if they needed to be recodified or repealed. And we ended up amending the bill to put all of the RSAs that had been identified for repeal into the study committee. So what you have before you is basically a bill to ask a study committee to look at each of these RSAs and determine, do we repeal it or do we recodify it? That's the substance of the bill, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Bose. And Senator?
Thank you. Thanks, Representative. And could you talk a little bit about the TNC portions of this?
Talk a little bit about the what?
The TNC driver requirements, the transportation.
The part that's actually been recodified, there is one section of statute that was recodified from its old location to its new location, and that's the piece of the bill that you see that actually talks about that. So it's just a recodification of existing statute into a new place in statute.
So there's no real I mean, I can ask, but there's no real substantive changes there?
No.
I thought so because I worked on this when we put it in, and I just, a lot of words. Thank you.
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Chairman.
you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further questions?
You were here in the 1800s.
Seeing none, thank you very much, Representative. And I see Rep. Thomas is here in support, not wishing to speak. Rep. John's here, not wishing to speak. In here, support. And so with that, we will close the hearing. And we will open up the hearing to HB 96. And we'll hear from Representative Hutusek.
Hutusek.
I don't know how many times you're going to tell me. Eventually, I'll get it.
That's right.
I know your first name is John. I can say John.
It took the House clerk 2 years to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, you're recognized, Senator. Representative.
Thank you, Senator Avard and senators of this august committee. I'm here to present House Bill 96. It takes exactly 2.5 lines, and it states, the governor shall issue an annual proclamation calling for the proper observance of May 3rd as the Old Man of the Mountain Day in honor of the day the iconic rock formation collapsed. Well, he just decided to come down. It was his time, I would guess. I've thought about this for over 2 years. I talked to quite a few of my friends on both sides of the wall, and a lot of people thought it was about time that we did something to remember him after 20 years. That's basically it. And the signatories and sponsors are leadership on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the wall. I asked them, and they said, we will sign if nobody else gets to sign, just the 4 parties. Now, this is my testimony, and I would just like to leave you with one thought. This is from the Old Man of the Mountain. In memoriam, May 3rd, 2003. Men hang out their signs indicative of their respective trades. Shoemakers hang out a giant shoe, jewelers a monster watch, and the dentist hangs out a gold tooth. But in the mountains of New Hampshire, God Almighty has hung out a sign to show that here he makes men. Daniel Webster. Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, Representative, and we appreciate your testimony. And seeing no questions, thank you. Now, I have nobody opposed to this, and if you want to consider the fact that we have only 20 minutes to exec, and keep your comments to as briefly as possible, we will have an opportunity to exec this if you have that. And you are Representative Diane.
Hi, Representative Diane Schuett. I represent Merrimack 12 Pembroke, and I'm here representing the bipartisan minority of House ED&A. You may know that our committee is not predisposed to add a lot of days to our statutes. That said, a couple of my colleagues and I felt this particular bill should be the exception. My belief is that this date and recognition of the old man should be brought forward every year to future generations of Granite Staters so that it's not lost to history. To further demonstrate that, I was here earlier this morning greeting a bunch of 4th graders from my town, and we posed the question to them, do you think that recognition of the old man should be in statute? And the vote was unanimous, yes. So I'll further point out that while the committee report was ITL, the majority of the House agreed with overturning that. The vote was 181 to 198 to overturn the ITL. And I would hope that the Senate will go forward and pass the bill so that we can get it to the governor in time for the 20th anniversary next month.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Seeing no further questions, does anybody else want to speak on this? Okay. And you are?
My name is David Nielsen.
Yes.
I'm the last official caretaker of the Old Man of the Mountain. I would speak in favor of this bill, and for more than 1,000 reasons that I could give you, I would ask you to encourage your colleagues to do the same. And because you're tight on time, I'll ask you if there are any questions that you have.
Absolutely none.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your days.
All right, you too. Does anybody else want to speak on this? Seeing none. Thank you very much. We're going to close the hearing on HB 96. Is there a motion to move into exec?
So moved.
Seconded by Senator Waters. 96, does anybody want to consider 96?
Second.
Senator Waters moves on to pass and seconded by Senator Pearl. All right, now, discussion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, is there a motion for consent? Senator Waters moves consent.
Second.
Who? You want to take it? Okay. All right, and so seconded by Senator Pearl. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, Senator Bertzel would like to take this out without objection.
Well, since I won't have the opportunity to give a historical speech because I've done research on this, you can take it out.
You can take it out.
No, that's all right. No, because we're not going to the floor.
Consent.
Yeah, it's on consent.
It's on
If you'd
consent.
like to, Senator Bertzel, go right ahead.
Would you like to do a joint blurb together?
No, it's all right.
All right, all in favor of consent?
Aye. I think we
Aye.
voted already.
Anybody opposed? Seeing none. So, I'm going to do one more bill, and I'm going to.
You want to do 219?
No, 56. Is there a motion on 56? Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, discussion?
I object, Mr. Chair. We have just been handed a stack of testimony, rushed through the hearing, and not able to ask questions.
You are
that-
allowed to ask questions.
Actually, no, there were a few people that you did not allow questions to be asked of. So I would like to have a chance to review all of this before we exec this. This is absolutely a rush to judgment, considering the amount of testimony we heard today, and we cut off another one. So I would like to take a moment, take a beat to be able to read all of this and take it in.
Further discussion? All in favor of ITL?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Seeing none. Okay.
No, seeing two.
Two. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so 2 opposed, and I'll take this out. And did you want to do the other one?
How do you guys feel on 219?
It's okay.
All right, then I'll move on to pass.
Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Waters.
I did want to ask some question about the transportation network companies because I worked on most of that language. I just want to make sure it was all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to be, but you know, there's a lot there. But we wrote some very good regulations about that.
As long as you're
5-6
comfortable
years
moving
ago.
it,
So I think we're in a good place.
Okay. All right, all in favor of ought to pass? Who yeah, and you seconded it.
I mean,
All-
I moved it, yes.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, is there a motion for consent?
So moved.
Okay, all discussion, all in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none,
You want to take it out or you want me to? Why don't you take it out? You know a lot about it.
Senator Waters will take that out. And is there a motion to move out of exec?
So moved.
All right,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, now we are going to, we're in recess on that last bill, right?
Yes.
So the committee is now ended. All in favor?
I don't think that's an all.
Any opposed?
We need a vote on that one.
Howard, Kevin, you got just a second?
Yeah, sure.
So,
Yeah.